But for me, what's really much more interesting is not the price of Bitcoin, but it's the impact Bitcoin has on the people who've accepted it. So you look at people who've been in Bitcoin for 10 years now, they've been changed by Bitcoin, right? More so than people who are just coming to it now. And it's not necessarily that everyone's going to be changed by it in the same way. People may have come to it later because they're a different type of person fundamentally. So what Bitcoin brings out in them is something different than what's been brought out in the people who've been around for 10 years. I still really hold true that Bitcoin is one of these, like the greatest gift that Bitcoin gives us is not wealth in terms of financial terms. It's the discovery and development of your true self, right? That under the fiat standard, we live in this world that's where lies are very prevalent. The money itself is a lie. The politicians lie to print more of the money that's itself a lie.
It's really important. I mean, it's a little bit conflicted, right? I mean, it's important that people understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution. But they're going to be.
You have to pretend to be a victim so that you get the benefits of it, or participate in the lie. So it's a system that doesn't let you discover who you truly are. It rewards these incentives of being who you truly aren't, and what truly isn't. And so Bitcoin is like this gigantic 180-degree shift towards truth. And the journey of becoming a Bitcoiner is a journey that develops your truth identification skills, your lie identification skills, your reasoning, your ability to form lasting relationships with other people, the experience of what it's like to enter into an honest agreement and follow through. So it builds all these virtues. And that's why I wrote this one article a few years ago called Rich or Poor Bitcoiners Have What Money Can't Buy. And it's all about how the journey to become a Bitcoiner actually develops your intelligence, it develops your integrity, it develops your ability to tell the truth, it develops relationships and friendships that are genuine and authentic with respect to who you actually are rather than what other people expect of you. And so you end up at the end of the day, you're smarter, you're happier, you're more insightful, you're more honest. Well, these are all virtues that money can't buy. You can't go into a store and buy intelligence. You can't buy friendship. You can't buy honesty. But becoming a Bitcoiner gets you these things. And the longer you're in it, the more you strengthen that muscle, the more you exercise the muscle of being virtuous.
Mr. Tomer Strolight, thank you so much for joining me today on the Playable Characters show. I always joke with everyone that you're trying to find people who can critically think in a sea of non-playable characters. So I just appreciate you joining me here today, and you're just very apt for the show's title. So thank you.
Well, thanks for considering me a playable character.
Absolutely, Tomer. So Tomer, just a real short bio in case anyone's not aware of who you are. Again, you wrote Why Bitcoin, which I have around here somewhere. Some of the Bitcoin trading cards, not Tomer specifically. Series 1 is Why Bitcoin book, which I actually have in a case somewhere. So I couldn't get that out to show everybody right now, but just incredible resources that Tomer has written.
I have a copy right here.
Yeah, there you go.
Like sheer coincidence.
There you go. So, we thank Tomer for his many contributions to the Bitcoin space for really over a decade now, and writing articles, editor at Swan, and just everything you have done to really push forward the narrative. So I would love to, we talked off stage a little bit about this, of just, Bitcoin personal development and really, settling yourself and settling your mind and starting to think of things differently. And again, your generational wealth video, which is, again, I was saying to you, I think one of the most phenomenal videos, and just seeing what the future holds, but in your mind, in your words, like what do you see going forward? Because we have, like we said, Svetsky seemingly changing his tune a little bit. You have Samson, Pierre, some people saying, hey, $1 million candles, Balaji in the last year, a handful of people saying, hey, this could happen really quickly. What are we in for? Tomer, what do you see on the horizon here?
Well, I think it's hard to know where to begin to respond to this. If we start where you finished, in terms of like what we're seeing happen with adoption and price of Bitcoin, I think what we've always seen is we've seen these huge, like, it's not a continuous smooth function. We have these huge bull markets, these huge surges which blow everybody away, nobody can believe, and then everyone gets overconfident, and then we have these big setbacks. But each time it's kind of like this fractal, right? It's like where we retreat to is somewhere where it was way above what was before. Eventually you hit something which is all the money in the world, or the inflection point on the S curve where things have to slow down. But I don't think we're there yet. And it's hard to know exactly with foresight, exactly what conditions need to be in place for another one of those surges to happen. I don't think we're going to have this one hyper Bitcoinization surge quickly that's going to be, well, we go from 70,000 where we're at today to all the money in the world in the course of a year or even a cycle, right? I think there are still cycles ahead of us, because that's the way adoption and creative destruction work, right? They appeal to a whole group of people. Some of that group of people turn out to be disillusioned by the appeal that they thought would work for them, and so you have this leap forward followed by this setback. But for me, what's really much more interesting is not the price of Bitcoin, but it's the impact Bitcoin has on the people who've accepted it, and the bigger impact that it has over the longer period of time that people have accepted it. So you look at people who've been in Bitcoin for 10 years now, they've been changed by Bitcoin, right? More so than people who are just coming to it now. And it's not necessarily that everyone's going to be changed by it in the same way. People may have come to it later because they're a different type of person fundamentally. So what Bitcoin brings out in them is something different than what's been brought out in the people who've been around for 10 years. I still really hold true that Bitcoin is one of these, like the greatest gift that Bitcoin gives us is not wealth in terms of financial terms. It's the discovery and development of your true self, right? That under the fiat standard, we live in this world where lies are very prevalent. The money itself is a lie. The politicians lie to print more of the money that's itself a lie. You have to pretend to be a victim so that you get the benefits of it, or participate in the lie. So it's a system that doesn't let you discover who you truly are. It rewards these incentives of being who you truly aren't, and what truly isn't. And so Bitcoin is like this gigantic 180-degree shift towards truth. And the journey of becoming a Bitcoiner is a journey that develops your truth identification skills, your lie identification skills, your reasoning, your ability to form lasting relationships with other people, the experience of what it's like to enter into an honest agreement and follow through. So it builds all these virtues. And that's why I wrote this one article a few years ago called "Rich or Poor Bitcoiners Have What Money Can't Buy." And it's all about how the journey to become a Bitcoiner actually develops your intelligence, it develops your integrity, it develops your ability to tell the truth, it develops relationships and friendships that are genuine and authentic with respect to who you actually are rather than what other people expect of you. And so you end up at the end of the day, you're smarter, you're happier, you're more insightful, you're more honest. Well, these are all virtues that money can't buy. You can't go into a store and buy intelligence. You can't buy friendship. You can't buy, honesty. But becoming a Bitcoiner gets you these things. And the longer you're in it, the more you strengthen that muscle, the more you exercise the muscle of being virtuous. And this to me is the amazing thing. Like, if we talk about the people who you just spoke about, they've been in Bitcoin long enough that you've actually been able to see their journey, their discovery, the changes and transformations in them. If you followed them all along, or if you studied a little bit of their history, and I know that Bitcoin has changed me. So there's that meme, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. I think that there's something really powerful and profound about that. I want to say very much, it changes you for the better, right? And it makes you aware of how much potential there is in you to be so much better when you're coming from a world that's really broken. And I think that this is something that's going to lead into the growth and continuity of Bitcoin itself. Like, I really think it's going to change civilization. It's going to change the game of politics. It's going to change the game of a contract law or agreements, right? Like, we have all these systems that we set up that are competitive, they're rivalrous, right? If you have a contract with someone, you're two parties, you each hire a lawyer, the lawyers act exclusively on each of your behalf at the expense of the other. We think that's we know it's a bad system, but we think it's the least bad of all the systems. And if you have a disagreement, then you go to court and a judge rules, and it's a rival, it's an adversarial system. You have a solicitor on your behalf. The other party has a solicitor on their behalf. And Bitcoin is like a totally different type of agreement, right? Here it is. It's this agreement, right? When you join Bitcoin, when you start to Bitcoin, you agree to the rules of Bitcoin. I have a big thing of the white paper here, but I've just hung up another work of art in its place. You agree to those rules. And not only do you agree to those rules, you enforce those rules if you run a node. And not only do you enforce the rules in a different, like you enforce the rules in a different way than the courts do. In the courts, it's like, if you and I have a contract and you breach the contract, then I can sue you for breach of contract. But you've already broken the rules of the agreement, right? And we're just going to court to see, did you actually break the rules and how much damage did you cause? And in Bitcoin, nobody can break the rules. It's an agreement that has no court of appeals, no court at all, no judge at all, because the software is the judge that prevents anyone from breaking the rules. So you can't double spend and then someone sues you for double spending. You just can't double spend. You can't break the rule. So it's like, it's not, you should not steal. It's you cannot steal, right? Like when you agree to the agreement, you and everybody else looks at every action that everyone tries to take before the action is taken and says, this action is permissible, it will proceed, or this action violates the contract of Bitcoin's rules and it won't proceed. And so it's a giant agreement. It's a giant cooperation with nobody breaking rules, with everybody, not finding any reward from it, and no settlement system that's rivalrous. That's removing, cryptography is an adversarial system. There's a challenge, there's a creator and a challenger and all this kind of stuff. But Bitcoin actually takes this rivalrous technology, this rivalrous know-how, and turns it into a giant cooperation. And everyone who is in Bitcoin agrees to the agreement. And it's a very hard agreement to change. And the piece I just finished writing this morning, although it still needs some work, is like the only way to change this agreement is in a non-rivalrous fashion, right? It's through consensus. And we're so not used to it. Like there's a bunch of discussion going on in the Bitcoin community right now about changing Bitcoin, and it's going nowhere. It's stuck. Why? Because people are using the same techniques that they see being used in democracy, right? Assassinate the character of your opponent, call him stupid, call him, in Bitcoin, you can call him retarded, right? So just insult the other side, tell them that they're ignorant, tell them that they're hopeless. And this doesn't work in Bitcoin, right? It's just everyone's getting more and more frustrated that nobody's prepared to move forward with a decision, that the status quo holds, because Bitcoin is built to enforce the status quo unless everybody or near everybody agrees. And so we need to change our tactics of how we interact with each other, not to call each other stupid, but to try to understand what the other person's objection is or what the other person's concerns are, and then address them through honest dialogue, and cooperation and respect, rather than through just this, this Donald Trump tactic of insulting the other person and making fun of them and coming up with names and wearing meme faces. Like that's not going to work. And I think it's a lesson that, we have to learn, because we have to try the old ways and see that the old ways don't work in Bitcoin. And then enterprising, intelligent, innovative people have to come up with the innovation that does work. And so if we're going to change Bitcoin, whether that's in the next year or in the next 30 years, or maybe we'll all die out because we've got all these bad habits of insulting each other and we can't come to any kind of agreement, but eventually it will come. And so it's like, you don't change Bitcoin unless you change yourself first to be honest, to be virtuous, right? Like through honesty, through integrity, through building something that's actually going to work and persuade others, that considers everybody else's interests, not just your own interests, that works for everybody. So I think it's going to change civilization in the biggest way, because we've forgotten, like our current civilization, this isn't true throughout all of human history, but in current history, we're dividing and conquering each other. We're divided. And Bitcoin unites, and it demands that you unite. It offers no solution to the how do you change Bitcoin unless you unite, right? It's like, yes, you get yourselves together and get a solution that works for everybody. So
we want to thank our sponsor. This show is presented by Bitcoin Trading Cards, an orange pill in a pack, making talking about things that normally make you want to cry fun and easy. The scarcest and most educational cards to ever exist. Available now.
Um, I don't even remember what your question was at this point. I've
No,
gone off on a
yeah,
real long
this
tangent.
is it, Stormy. Honestly, like I could just kind of sit back and listen to you for the entire hour or whatever and kind of talk about this, which is the theme, like we said, kind of Bitcoin personal development. Like
Yeah.
it's this world of how do you go to this next. And where I was going with this also was the like George Gammon and Jeff Booth, right? They've kind of been going back and forth over the last year plus or whatever it is in this thing. And George Gammon actually, honestly, and I think I actually have it up, and I actually do. He said, he distilled it down to one thing, which I think he's accurately got. But I think what I would love for you to touch on more is how, again, Bitcoin changes you. Like George doesn't think that the dynamics and just the way Bitcoin aligns the incentives, he doesn't think that's going to change people. And like someone like me or you were like, well, I've seen everyone in Bitcoin basically change themselves because of Bitcoin adopting this standard. And for someone like George, who's not fully in it, like he gets it intellectually, like he's almost there, almost fully orange pilled. But once you got to cross that Rubicon to fully understand it, see the wizard behind the curtain, I guess my question to you kind of is, what is the framework? Like you touched on it on Cafe Bitcoin today, actually, which I thought was so brilliant. It's like this framework almost that people have to kind of walk through. Everyone's got to get through this gauntlet of study and this work that has to be put in to actually understand the asset, to then understand it's money, it's a technology, it's an invention, or maybe it's none of those things, right? Like it's that's the nuance of all this. We almost don't even know, and humans have such a hard time grappling with this. Like you were saying, you have to understand what money is. You have to understand disruptive technologies and how they work. All these frameworks. So I would love for you to kind of touch on, like, what is this framework almost for you? What does it look like for people to fully understand and for a George Gammon or a normie or someone who's completely like, what do you have to go through in order to see generational change, seismic, radical shift in humans?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's two types of people who go through the change. There's the pioneers, and then there's the people who settle into the areas that have been developed by the pioneers, right? And I don't know where George Gammon's going to end up on this thing. I'll speak as though there's a 100% certainty that this change is coming and it's going to be successful. I want to talk about the ifs, right? In the same way that America, the Americas was an undeveloped land, in terms of Western culture when Columbus and his crew landed, and then the pioneers followed suit, and settled. Like when they came, there was nothing for them, right? There weren't like stores, there weren't welcome committees. There were people living on the lands, but they had a very different culture and a very different civilization than Western culture did. So it had to be built in some degree before other settlers were prepared to come to this, to this wilderness, to this new frontier. And once the new frontier was developed, then we had this shift where everybody wanted to come to America. And still to this day, despite all of its current problems, tons and tons of people are trying to get into America and are getting into America. And that's creating controversy within America. But the people who had the vision to go there and to build out, who were fleeing oppression and, or just dreamt of a better life, those were the pioneers. And I think that's what we're seeing as the phase of development of Bitcoin now. And it's not an overnight thing. Again, we've grown up in a civilization that's like, oh, it's instant gratification, immediate results. It takes time to build something as dramatically unique and different as a consensus system that has tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people participating in the consensus and scaling it, working on it, enforcing it, taking on all the responsibilities that come, and making sure that all the responsibilities are checked for and developed properly. There's a lot of discoveries that we still have to make in terms of what exact responsibilities we have as the thing grows. So you've got a very pioneering group of people inside of Bitcoin. And what they're prepared to do is let go a lot of old assumptions and discover what needs to be true rather than what was supposed to be true. And I don't mean like, you say it's supposed to be true. It's like what we supposed was true when we were all born into a world where the government says this piece of paper is worth 10 times what that piece of paper is worth, and that's worth an hour of your work. Like, we're now awakened to the fact that there's something not necessarily true about that, and something unsustainable about that it's falling apart because of corruption and bad, and bad ideas, and it's eroding our civilization because it's not built on a stable foundation. It's built on a fragile foundation where the lies have crept in long enough that the foundation is crumbling. That's certainly what we Bitcoiners have come to view. And so we're not trying to build on that foundation of fiat. We're trying to build on a fundamentally new foundation, and we found Bitcoin. I think that's what makes Bitcoin historic. There have always been people who've been questioning fiat, and occupying Wall Street and protesting against this and protesting against that. And they've had solutions like socialism and other things that they've tried to implement, but those solutions haven't worked, right? Or they've had no solutions. So they're just angry and protesting. But we suddenly have this foundation in Bitcoin that says, I can fix all of these things. Or I'm an indestructible foundation that fixes a lot of the things that are broken at the base layer. And the other things that seem to be broken, whether they're at the base layer or elsewhere, can be built on top of Bitcoin, right? And so we really believe, we're not just talking about building technology on top of Bitcoin, right? We're talking about building culture and civilization on top of Bitcoin, a culture of honesty, integrity, intelligence, love of your fellow person, the understanding that you need to cooperate with them, non-violence, non-aggression, non-war, peaceful. These are all things that you can build on Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin doesn't tolerate their antithesis, right? It's like you don't win by killing somebody in Bitcoin. You don't get their property. You win by arriving at a mutually agreed exchange with them, and then exchanging their Bitcoin through the use of their secret keys with you. So it's a very different foundation, and this is why it's so hard to understand for people. I'm not going to pick on George Gammon, but I'll use him as an example. He's trying to understand the world. He's above average in IQ, but he's not like super genius. He's dedicated a lot of his life to trying to understand how to make money in the fiat system. And he's bringing a lot of baggage with him when he comes to Bitcoin about how the world works and how the world doesn't work. And I haven't listened to a lot of him, but I'm just going to take it at face value. What you said, he doesn't believe, he's cynical. He's doubtful about the fact that Bitcoin will change people. Well, he's coming from a world that is filled with cynicism. It's filled with these assumptions that people are bad because the incentives reward people who are bad and punish people who are good. And so you look at that world and you see all these greedy, backstabbing, lying, double talking, people in the most powerful positions in the world. And you make the mistake to think this is the way of the world. But it's not. It's the way of fiat, right? It's the way of a system that's filled with corruption ends up being filled with corruption. And we've seen it in history. We've seen empires that started off virtuous and strong and proud and hardworking and capable and open become corrupted and eventually collapse. And very oftentimes it's because the money became corrupted, right? Whether it was fiat money or clipped coins or debased coins. In all of these cases, the empire got weaker and weaker. As the money got weaker, so did everything that the empire built. Right? They built more. The money became fragile, and so what they built became fragile. That's a really interesting thing, and that would be something that I would urge the likes of George Gammon to study in history, not just the last 50 years of what's happened in our modern era, but the ideas that keep happening over and over. And he might then become a cynic. I'm not at all attributing this to George Gammon. He might then become a cynic and say, well, yes, it's true. This has happened. But because it keeps happening over and over again, why do you think it won't happen to Bitcoin? The debasement and collapse of the civilization. And for me, the thought experiment is, well, what did happen? What was the cause of the failure? And there were two things that are very related in every one of these failures that happened in the past. One is the leadership became corrupt. And two is they therefore corrupted the money, right? So like they clipped the coins, they made the coins less pure, they debased them, they lost their purchasing power, they lost their credibility, and they stopped working for the good of the civilization. They started being corrupt, right? Being what's the word I'm looking for? It's at the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it right now, or it's not coming to me right now. Decadent. They became decadent. That's the word, right? And so instead of fortifying the civilization, fortifying the empire, they indulged in frivolous delights while the empire started to collapse around them, and they never took attention to redirect their efforts at refortifying the civilization. In fact, these changes happened so slowly that it was generations after generations that it happened. So someone would have been born into a generation of decadence, and they would have thought this is the way life is. And in the meantime, they're not protecting and developing the civilization. I think that's happened in an accelerated rate in our fiat world. And I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but I come back to the main point is like, so why won't this happen to Bitcoin? Well, for one, it doesn't have leaders to become decadent, right? Mm-hmm. So like the biggest vulnerability of any empire was always its emperor. If the emperor becomes decadent and corrupt, the fish rots from the head and everything starts to get worse and worse and worse. And his lieutenants become decadent and their lieutenants become decadent and the senators become decadent. And everything just is so rotten by the time some honest person gets to it that there's no way to get through it. We're kind of celebrating Easter today's Easter Monday. And it's like, this is what Jesus and his disciples seem to have gone through as well, right? And as the Roman Empire was collapsing, there was no honest process to appeal to, and they had their heads chopped off or were imprisoned in their discussions with decadent politicians who were just trying to stay in power and too fearful to make decisions aligned with truth. So there's something in that story. But Bitcoin is resilient against the decadent leadership through a very simple solution. Nobody's the leader, right? There's no election process to find the most benevolent, most intelligent philosopher king to put in charge, which is what Plato thought. It's like we've given up on the idea of putting someone in charge because absolute power seems to corrupt absolutely. Eventually you get bad leadership and the leadership destroys the empire. We'll just remove the leader from the equation. This is a system that somehow works without a leader. And, the more you study Bitcoin, the more you realize, wow, the balance of power that it creates is much more powerful than simply the tripartite division of powers that the American founding fathers tried to put in place of separating the legislative, judiciary, and executive branches. I've written a piece on that too, I've written a few pieces about how Bitcoin is so similar in spirit and goals to what the American Constitution is and what America is, but in a totally different mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. It's not pieces of paper that say we the people are imbued with these rights. It's like peer to peer. Everybody's an equal in this thing, and an equal in it by code, right? Everyone can come up with a private key. Anyone can generate a private key with entropy, and that's all it takes to be a member. And all members are of equal standing. No private key has any more power than any other private key. So it's really a remarkable measure here. And then, so the first thing is it doesn't have a leader. They can't be corrupted. And the second is it can't be debased. Like nobody can inflate the money supply, which was the other thing that destroyed all these empires in history. And it's not like these are but two of the causes that destroyed empires throughout history. I think they're the two root causes that destroyed empires throughout history. And they're probably very closely intertwined. They're two sides of the same coin, the corrupted leader and the corrupted money, because the leader is able to corrupt the money and the corrupted money further corrupts the leader. And so you end up with this death spiral of empire as these things get more and more corrupted, and more corrupt people move into government because that's the way you get the money in the corrupted money world. Well, you can't corrupt the money. You can't corrupt the leadership. There is no leadership, and the money is finite. It's predetermined. It's enforced by everybody. It's unbreakable. It's the monetary policy cannot be broken. And so we actually have this base to build a civilization, a global empire on that treats everybody equally. Right? Everyone is created equal in this empire. We all just need to generate a random number to participate in this empire. And we don't have to worry about a corrupt leader, and we don't have to worry about the money debasing. So we can focus our efforts on other things than politics and keeping the integrity in the money, like building things of value for ourselves and other people. And we can focus on it across generations. I think the first thing for our generation to do is to get our house in order before we start building houses for other generations. But as time goes on, I think more and more we'll see people satisfy their immediate needs and even their needs for their lifetime. And what they want to do is build is built for the future, even beyond what they're able to build for themselves. So I'm coming at it from having experienced some of these turning points myself and being filled with hope by them, and seeing it in so many others. So whether it's Svetsky, who's now saying it'll take 60 years, or someone else who might be saying it could be right around the corner, to me, that's almost like beside the point. They're all pointing in this direction that Bitcoin's going to make us better people and our civilization a better civilization. So it's almost besides, right? Versus we look at the fiat civilization and everyone's saying, oh my God, it's going to collapse. It's pointless. Why have kids? Why even continue to live? Like that negativity, that nihilism that exists indicates how bad the foundation is crumbling in the fiat system. And the optimism and hope that exists throughout the entirety of the Bitcoin system illustrates how high the potential is of Bitcoin and how much it is changing people. Like, if you're coming from a society where everybody's negative, I shouldn't say everybody's negative, but where there's such a strong negative sentiment that survey after survey, year after year, people feel the condition of the country is worse than it was the year before, right? Like that's a data point you can point to. People are constantly saying things aren't as good as they used to be. And you can see it going down. You can see it used to go up in the 30s and 40s as people were coming out of the depression and the war. So something's changed, and the level of trust in institutions is at all-time low. Anything new even that gets measured is like immediately dropping. So like that's the world that George Gammon lives in. And then you have all these people who are Bitcoiners and they don't live in that world anymore, right? So that's what I would say to George. It's like, well, take a look at all these people who are in Bitcoin, who've been in it for a long time. They all have optimism about the long-term future of our civilization, that this thing repairs it. So does it change you? Absolutely. Might they all be wrong? Well, that's another discussion to have, but they're changing to optimists, and optimists tend to build things, right? They may not get everything right, but it's the people who believe they can build an airplane are the ones who build an airplane while everybody else is saying it's impossible for humans to fly. So, you've got this optimistic, hardworking, succeeding group of people. That's a growing group of people, right? It's like Bitcoin is this new frontier that is attracting a lot of people to build a new civilization onto. And it's not a frontier in terms of like a geographically separate place. It's a financially separate place, right? It's a politically separate place. It's been removed from the control of democracy, the control of governments, the control of existing financial institutions. It stands alone, apart, uninfluenceable by these things. And some of them are kind of coming over now and trying to figure out what is actually going on here. And it's also got this great defense, right? In the sense that America was defended by the ocean and its coastline and its massiveness, Bitcoin is defended by cryptography and hash power and mining, and which no government in the world today, in the same way that the British Empire couldn't come and defeat the Americans, no government in the world can come and defeat the Bitcoiners. So it's really a historic event, I think.
I couldn't agree more. It makes me think of, I've always had this thought too, with like you said, with the Constitution. The Constitution was great if you were, maybe a friend of America, if you were inside the walls of America at an embassy somewhere around the world, right? Like if it kind of extended, that was it, right? But the white paper is global. It's possibly
everybody
outside of Earth.
It really is. We all the people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really the Constitution on steroids, the Constitution 2.0, and it's ratified every 10 minutes. And I think that's...
I've written an essay on this called, that one is called The United State of Bitcoin. And, and it speaks to how we're all united in the state, and it's available for everyone in the world. And it compares step by step the Constitution of the United States to the Bitcoin white paper, and shows how, while they're trying to achieve different things, they actually both achieve pretty similar things. Yeah. The white paper in a narrower context, but of the context on which it's all built upon. And I play a little fun on the word state, because there's the state of the blockchain, and there's obviously the state of Connecticut, or the government, right? And these two definitions. But I think we're all united by this, and we're all united in the state of Bitcoin, right? Like you run a node, I run a node. They're united in their agreement on the state of the network. So we're like changing the definition of the word state to something that we can actually all agree on. And and not fight over, but use our energy to come to greater and stronger agreement about it. It's a 180-degree pivot.
It really is. And I wanted to say that because I thought it might touch you off a little bit because of that. So it's funny. So like I think of the other thing it makes me think of too is talking about George and using George as a placeholder, obviously, like we kind of have been. Not to
You brought him up. I've only heard him speak twice in my life. So if there's anything that I'm misstating about him, it's just like, yes, we're using him as a placeholder, and I apologize to him if I've mischaracterized him in any way. I don't really know.
No. That's you said it very well, and you even kind of got the gist of what his whole point with a lot of this is. He's very Thomas Sowell. Like Thomas Sowell is one of his biggest mentors by far, probably. And life's about trade-offs, and basically like we need to educate people, and you have to educate.
I know Thomas Sowell better than George.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And his thing.
And he's a very hard and crusty guy, right? Like he's very smart. He's very honest, but also very. The way I read him is he's very skeptical about the intelligence or intentions of the opposition.
Yes.
And I'm sympathetic to that. Sometimes your opposition is wrong. But it's different to say that they're stupid. And it's different to say that their intentions are wicked. They might be, but again, why would people move forward with wicked intentions? It's because they live in a system where they believe their wicked intentions will be rewarded, that they will get away with their wicked intentions. And I again go back and say, like, well, take a look at what's actually happens in Bitcoin. It was set up in such a splendid structure that it really doesn't reward wickedness, and it raises in its followers and the people who participate in it a keen eye to routing out and identifying, calling out, and extricating wickedness from the system. So
and you forecasted basically without even knowing it, like in essence what he was saying. And I've seen it with Kiyosaki too. Kiyosaki was my biggest mentor coming out of college 15 years ago, and seeing him with the first person I really got into, and his change just over the last few months, talking again with Jeff Booth more, and seeing him, he was like, oh wait, I got it. Yeah. Like it's a new system. It's not like I'm not trying to get more fiat. And that's where George comes from, or Kiyosaki came from. Right. And so it's a whole sea change. And that's what the human mind is a very hard time. Like we're getting off the sinking monetary debt-based Titanic and getting on to a life raft, a new boat. And people just have a very hard time recognizing that.
Yes, of course. They've, at some point in their life when they were young, some lesson got impressed upon them that, this is a do unto others before they do unto you world, right? Like that bad guys get away with crimes. And we were told all these stories that were nice and fairy tales and happy endings and stuff, but that's not really the way of the world. And they get ripped off, or they get beat up, or they get, or they do something wicked and they get away with it and they get rewarded for it. And so it starts to distort and shape their character. And I'm not saying that, Bitcoin somehow prevents people from lying and getting away with lies in general, but it does so at this very fundamental base layer of money, which is what the government has become, right? The government has become an issuer and hander out of money, right? Of incremental money, and a confiscator of money. That's 99% of what they do, right? They say they're doing it for good reasons, but they're violating the notion of property rights and self-determination in the first instance. And the minute that they think that they can do this, they're already saying, implicitly, that they can judge better what's good for you and others than you and others can judge working between yourselves, right? And so it's this fundamental violation of freedom, and not just freedom in the legal sense, but freedom in the spiritual sense. Right? Yes. There's someone there who's going to make determinations between you and others without letting you and others arrive at those determinations on your own.
Is it as simple as, again, like it's the whole, like when you don't understand, you haven't crossed this Rubicon, it seems absurd. And when you've seen the wizard behind the curtain, I guess for most Bitcoiners, right? It seems obvious. And it's almost too easy where it's is it Occam's razor, or is it Occam's razor?
The simplest solution is the right.
Yes.
Most usually the right one.
if people don't want to believe that it's that easy, like it's just a switch, like Tomer and I aren't saying, hey, you need to go get in a bodybuilding competition and go work out for a year and a half and watch what you eat and be super disciplined. It's one simple split-second decision to say, I'm going to use this money instead of this debt-based instrument. And all of a sudden life starts changing. It doesn't immediately change overnight, but all of a sudden things just start changing. Like you said, the incentives are aligned. And is it just idealistic versus pragmatic people? Like are Bitcoiners in the current epochs, are we just very idealistic and most people are cynical and like, what? I don't know. I think it's the question of,
I think people can come to it from different points, right? Like, there may be a naive idealism that is an easy route for someone who's naive and idealistic and discovers Bitcoin. They're also vulnerable, though, to all sorts of other traps, right? If you're naive and idealistic, someone comes to you and says, I've got a smart contract platform where you use proof of stake and this and that. And so they can get led down all these garden paths that lead them to disaster because they're naive, right? They're not able to scrutinize what is actually happening. So I actually think Bitcoin's a harder path. It's a path to recognize that something's wrong, which isn't that hard anymore today, but it's hard to know exactly what's wrong. It's then the listening to all these ideas around, well, what actually is wrong? Why does this present itself as a solution? How is it a solution? I think there's many appeals to the idealism idea behind here that aren't naive. I've written a lot about the story of Bitcoin's creation and Satoshi Nakamoto. Here is this individual who keeps his identity secret, solves this mathematical problem that mathematicians say is impossible to solve. He finds a practical solution to it anyways. It is the idea behind how this thing works. This thing works as a form of incorruptible, unled money. And then this guy disappears without spending any of his money, without doing it for the money, for the power, for the fame, for all of these fiat-based pursuits that people have. He just did it as a gift. And so there's also this spirit that rises that says, wow, people, this thing was created by someone who was really good, good in the sense of really smart, really creative, really hardworking, and really generous and really disciplined and really virtuous. And so you have this wonderful creation story that comes behind this thing that now is a gift to humanity, which differentiates it. I think this is one of the things that helps perhaps the naive and idealistic differentiate Bitcoin from all the other coins whose creators, who simply forked Satoshi's code and then said mine is better because it's faster, it's more reliable, it's whatever they said, right? None of the, they were trying to step into the shoes that Satoshi intentionally left unstepped into, right? He said, well, nobody should be the leader. Nobody should become famous for having created this thing. Nobody should have the power to wield over others. This is an egalitarian peer-to-peer system. And then you have these people fork the code and say, I'm the leader and I'm going to run it better. What's Satoshi done for us lately? And it's like every day, by not being here, Satoshi's doing more for us than anyone could possibly do by being here, right? Because the whole idea is it's peer-to-peer and everyone's equal. And there is no creator coming in charge to tell us how they will change the system and change the rules and change what we thought was true yesterday into something that's no longer true today. So yeah, Satoshi's doing his work every single day for us.
Yeah, that's an incredible point. Transitioning just a tiny bit, you were mentioning earlier too, which I thought was fascinating, and I'm a big fan of Peter Diamandis, and you were touching on him earlier today a little bit. I would love for you to go into a little bit of it was the 6 Ds, correct? Of disruption? Yeah. I would love for you to kind of touch on that a little bit, because again, like a lot of what we've been talking about and a lot of what Bitcoiners go through is this. Obviously, we're in a world, really, the world is entropic, it's disruption all the time, it's change anyway. But, Diamandis went to school with Saylor, obviously a brilliant guy in his own right. I would love for you to kind of touch on what you've been studying in that world and where your thoughts are with him.
Okay. I don't have everything open in front of me. I might not remember all of this, but I think what Peter did really well was he took a look at the history of disruptive competition, kind of following in the footsteps of The Innovator's Dilemma, whose authors' names are at the tip of my tongue and I just can't remember right now. But this was a study, a book that came out of Harvard, The Innovator's Dilemma, that showed, that companies kept getting disrupted out of their incumbent position. They would achieve a dominant position in the market, and then somebody else would come along and unseat them. Blockbuster get unseated by Netflix is the example that we gave, and mainframe computers getting unseated by desktop computer, personal computers. Like it happens over and over and over again that these incumbents are unable to protect their position. Kodak gets disrupted by digital photography, despite inventing digital photography. Right? Like, it's just, you invent the thing that destroys you, and you have a patent and a monopoly on it for some period of time, and you still fail to see its opportunity. And I think what Diamandis did really nice is single out 6 or 7 concepts that tend to happen in typically the same order, and I'll certainly get the order wrong. But they involve, and I'll just try to rhyme them off, and then we'll focus in on one. Like they digitize something, they dematerialize it, they disrupt it, they demonetize it, they're deceptive. I got 5 of the 6, and
pretty good.
I can't remember what the 6th one is. I'm always terrible at finishing off a list, but they do these 6 things that he cleverly finds words that begin with D to. And eventually, you find that, the video rental store is dematerialized. It's gone. It's just, it's your screen and remote control, right? It's digitized. It's streaming over the internet. It's been demonetized. You don't pay for each rental. You can download streams for free, or you pay 1 monthly fee, and you get all you can possibly eat for 4 people, at the same time. And so it's like all of these, and it's deceptive, because when it first starts, when Netflix first starts, it's mailing DVDs in the physical mail, but then it starts offering some programs on TV, on streaming, and they're garbage. There's not many of them. They're lousy. The internet connection is not great. So it's deceptive in that it looks like a bad idea. But then as bandwidth increases, and as the number of subscribers increases, and their ability to get great programming increases, suddenly it's like, why the heck would I go to Blockbuster when they might be out of the movie that I want, when I can get it instantly here? And I can even, there's magical features. Like, I stop watching it on this TV, I go to the other TV, and it picks up where I left off. It knows exactly who I am. It's making recommendations. None of these things were things that Blockbuster was doing. So these disruptive technologies completely eliminate the other things. And if you keep looking at the world, this was the point I was making, which is different from Diamandis' point. If you keep looking at the world from the perspective of the old, it's like your whole world collapses in on you all at once, right? It just feels like this thing that was this distant, tiny little nothing of a nit suddenly became big, 10 times the size of you, and is about to devour you, or has devoured you, and you're left disrupted, and you don't even understand the world anymore. And especially if you measure the world in terms of your old yardstick, right? Like the example I used was, how many blockbusters is a Netflix worth, right? And it's not just that Netflix is now worth 10 times what Blockbuster was at its time. It's like Blockbuster is worth 0. So Netflix is worth an infinite number of blockbusters, because Netflix made blockbusters worthless. Yeah. And that's the demonetization piece that people really have a hard time understanding when we're talking about money. Because how many dollars is a Bitcoin worth? Well, it used to be worth less than a cent, and now it's worth more than $70,000. So it's like, wow, that's 7 million times what it used to be worth against it. But it's demonetizing the dollar in the process, right? It's going to be worth infinity dollars if nobody uses dollars anymore. Yeah. And it's just like, nobody asked the question, how many blockbusters is Netflix worth? But everybody asks the question, how many dollars is a Bitcoin worth? And it's doing to the dollar exactly what Netflix did to Blockbuster. So this is the most deceptive attribute of its demonetization. It's like the unit that you're using to measure the value of this thing in is being destroyed by the thing that you're measuring it with. So it's just like, that's a really hard thing for people to process. And I mean, it's not like that thing isn't destroying itself in the process. And it's not like there aren't other things that are being demonetized, like real estate and the premiums on stocks and bonds and all these high multiples on things. But it's also replacing the thing that you're using to measure its size. So it's this is where Knut's infinity divided by 21 million kind of comes in. You can put a dollar sign in front of that infinity symbol, because that's the worth of Bitcoin ultimately, as it demonetizes money
Yeah.
and becomes the money.
It is. It's so hard to wrap your mind around until you see it. Like we just grown up in this world of inflation and fiat. I mean, there's really no one alive that knows anything other than inflation. Central banks and them
Yeah,
printing and really destroying the value of everything.
yeah,
And we know inherently, people talk about it all the time. They talk about politics and,
yeah,
well, I'd never go to politics. It's like the worst of people go there. And how do we have these two candidates? Like, we all talk about it, but like, who
yeah.
really thinks about it? Like actually sits and like, well, okay, what are we going to do about
Yeah.
this? And
Well, like, we're resigned to the fact that we live in a broken system,
yeah,
right? We're resigned to the fact that lousy
defeated.
people are
Yeah.
politicians, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know what? It doesn't have to be the case, but maybe you're right that politics is ultimately going to attract lousy people. So the solution isn't in politics. I mean, the solution is to take the teeth out of politics and take the teeth out of politicians, which is what the American Constitution first tried to do in a big way. But over time, the teeth grew back. And we've got the government biting into us rather than us biting into the government. So, but rather than have a battle of bites, let's just take the teeth out of that thing, create a system that neither we nor they can corrupt and manipulate, and choose to use that as the system, because it's just, because it's fair, because it's honest, and because it sidesteps all this corruption.
Yeah. Makes me think of Mike Maloney. I was telling you earlier, Robert Kiyosaki was, when I got into him 15 years ago, seeing the crash, great financial crisis, seeing the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street here in America, really two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And the media, everyone telling each other they were against each other, but you look back and you're like, we're on the same team. And you think of, Mike Maloney always said that people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And like you were just saying, like, if you actually, the dollar amounts or like the Bitcoin amounts are what we use to measure things by, but it's really like, what do you get for that? And I think that's such a brilliant way you said that. Like, how many blockbusters can you get for a Netflix now? Well, it's infinity, because blockbusters don't exist anymore. And I think that's this mechanism that humans have that hard time understanding and visualizing. So I think that's once people,
like 60 years from now, let's draw the line. Kids will be born, Bitcoin will be the money, and maybe in some history class they'll study the history of the thing called the dollar and how it started as gold, a paper that was backing gold, and then it became nothing, and then it collapsed, and then Bitcoin, right? So it'll be an interesting history if they even bother to study it, because they'll just be born into a world where they use Bitcoin or some derived technology from Bitcoin, and that'll be money to them. And they won't imagine that there was a world. They'll actually, I think, if to the extent that people do, some people will, but not everybody will, the people who study it, they'll look back at this era and they'll say, man, those people were primitive, right? Like, they relied on trust to make them this thing called money work, and the trust was constantly being violated and breached, and fortunes were being destroyed from people who earned them and stolen by people who didn't earn them. And it led to war, and there was violence. And like the 20th century, I hope, was the most violent century in all of human history, with multiple world wars. And the 21st century was the century characterized, I hope, by this rise to peace. And now in 2180, the people living 60 years from now are going to say, wow, like we've really solved the problem. But it is interesting. Like, I grew up in the 20th century, and we thought we solved the problem. We thought we'd come to the end of history when communism collapsed and Western liberal democracies took over, and everybody wanted to be a part of a democracy. We thought we had it figured out, but it made us, I think the worst part is it made us complacent. And that complacency led to all sorts of vulnerabilities and corruption, which we now can't find our way out of. And I think that's going to be a little bit of the same truth for Bitcoin, right? It's like, you need to not get complacent. The nice thing is, being not complacent in Bitcoin is just running a node and staying informed. Whereas being non-complacent in the world of wars and physical violence and physical force, physical government, is too much for any individual. And so you need these movements, but most of these movements get crushed by government because, people have day jobs. So they do the Tea Party for a little while, or they do Occupy Wall Street for a little while, but they don't have resources. It's like, well, we've made it asymmetric in our favor. We have the resources. Bitcoins, those are the resources that we recognize, and nodes, those are simple enough resources to run. And the decentralized nature of it and the use of asymmetric cryptography turns the tide over to this side of things.
So this is really interesting, and I'm glad you brought this back up, because I didn't close off our George Gammon, and and again, he's a placeholder for anyone listening. It's someone thinking like you said. George is a very high IQ, very big macro thinker, studied the system, probably knows it dang near better than anyone, the existing fiat legacy, inner working plumbing of the system, and so his big thing, and just to kind of come back full circle and put a cap on this, is what you just touched on, which is, and my question to you is, George's big fear is the next fourth turning, like you just said, 2080, whenever that is, 2080 or 2100, I guess, or maybe something like that. Yeah. The next fourth turning, George's whole thing is, I get what you guys are saying. However, we're going to have this generation, a couple generations of people who all they've known is Bitcoin, and that's great. And then they become complacent, and then we start the cycle back over again. That's like his macro point of all this. I don't think it's going to change humans enough. So my question to you is, do we reach escape velocity with Bitcoin, where you can't go backward? You can't have this fourth turning in this cycle.
Here's what I think. Again. Here's my response. I'm not saying nobody becomes complacent.
Right.
People who become complacent pay the price, but every single person has the choice to be non-complacent in the Bitcoin empire, right? I'm going to run a node. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to accept the rule changes that some clown is making, right? Like, we've already seen this happen in the history of Bitcoin. Roger Ver forks Bitcoin along with Jihan Wu, and they say they're going to change everything, and a bunch of people follow them, right? But a bunch of people don't. And the people who do follow them end up paying the price for following them, and they have to come back and restart, or they can continue to live in their deranged world where they're still right, or they can come back. And so, even small faction, like let's say someone convinced the whole of the Western Hemisphere that they need to be in charge of Bitcoin, but they didn't convince the African continent of it. Right. And so people in Africa, or even just in certain countries of Africa, continue to run Bitcoin as is. And these other people run some hard fork where there's leadership and elections and all this stuff. And it eventually collapses, just like every empire did before. Well, those people who chose Bitcoin get to continue to survive under the Bitcoin standard, under the Bitcoin empire. And I drew to these geographic lines, but I think what's actually going to happen is, just like it did with Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, is like the people who choose to stay on the system get to stay on the system. And the people who choose to leave the system. And so they can be neighbors. They can be two people living in the same household, and the consequences of being complacent play out. It could even be you divided, right? You can keep your Bitcoin when the hard fork happens. You can keep one and the other and just see how it both plays out. But inevitably, if something is subject to corruption because of its complacent holders, then it will become corrupted, and the value of it will be destroyed, whereas the thing that isn't subject to complacency will continue to have integrity and hold up. And so I think, as long as you've got some group of people in the world holding up, it'll hold together. And I think, I can't say this for sure, right? This is after my time here is done, but I think people will recognize enough about the merits of this thing to be highly sensitive and highly worried about easy solutions by giving someone control. I'm not saying it won't happen. In fact, I think it will happen, but it won't be worldwide, right? Mm-hmm. And it'll be short-lived, and it'll be right now we say in history, every fiat currency that ever existed has failed. I think people will come to say every fork of Bitcoin that has ever existed failed, right? Like, and that will be the historic reflection after this happens dozens of times. And it's already true, right? There have been dozens of forks of Bitcoin. It's fair to say that there have been failures. Some people will dispute that, but I think those people are insane. So.
Yeah, but and I know we're getting close to the end here, so I got a thing or two left for you here before we run and be cognizant of your time. But what I gather, and I love the way you said that. What I gather basically from that is people that are concerned about that. It's when you're forking Bitcoin, like you said, whether it's some fiat government coin or it's some actual digital fork of Bitcoin, it becomes very costly to do that. So it incentivizes people to stay up with Bitcoin, and it incentivizes you to be informed about this system, or else you're going to cost your life potentially, or your wealth, or your family, or whatever, to not be informed and understanding. And that's the whole Bitcoin changes you. And now we're really coming full circle.
No, I mean, these are all related. These are all simultaneous things, right? Like there's not one that causes the other that causes the other. They're all like simultaneous happenings that are a result. Some things take time to play out, but they're all they're all happening before our very eyes. And I think that to me is why, like, I'm so fascinated by this, because it looks like such a wonderful thing, and it's so historic, and it's an innovation. So everything that I've ever been interested in my life is like playing out in this thing. And I'm able to use the tools that I've developed in my life to perhaps peer into this thing and see a little bit more accurately than other people what's actually happening here that is of interest to me, and share some of that with other people that they might find useful. So that's what has me like so cool. Unable to stop
right.
thinking.
I know. I mean, it's like, yeah, again, I could listen to you for hours, talk about this stuff and wax poetic about it. I know many people could, but I know we don't have hours here, unfortunately. But in saying that, and kind of wrapping with a last thing or two here, what started you down that path? You know, a brief history of like how you got, working with Swan and editing the content there and stuff like that, writing the books. Obviously, Bitcoin trading cards, like we said earlier, we have your book as one of the first cards, basically one of the first education cards in that series. What led you down this path of, you, like you said, using these skills to all of a sudden you find yourself here producing content and, really helping educate people. Yeah, there it is.
Here's the trading card.
Yep.
I keep it handy.
Yep.
For me, I was interested in the nature of money my whole life. I was born in Israel, and we had a hyperinflation event, which is part of the reason my family left, as they told me. They were also concerned about war, which is a very valid concern to this day. And so I always had it in my mind to try to understand business. And I did a couple of degrees in business school, and I had a career in business. And then the 2008 financial crisis came around, and I saw all sorts of really unjust things happen. Like, I saw the people who should have been bankrupt get these bailouts. Yeah. And so it was like, well, this game is rigged. I've worked my ass off to try to make a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what these people got for free, who should have, who, if I had fucked up like them, I would have been broke. But they got, and I probably would have gone to jail if I did what they did, but they didn't go to jail either. So there was there was this real sense of, something's very wrong in the world. And, and then I found Bitcoin in 2013, and it started to answer a lot of these questions for me. It was like, well, a system can exist, and study that other system better. So a lot of what we discussed about like finding this new frontier and exploring it and trying to understand it, I became quite obsessed with Bitcoin. And eventually, when the COVID thing came around, the job that I had in the fiat world evaporated, because it was in a company that did things in person. And so, like, there was no more in-person stuff for a year. And I decided, I love Bitcoin. I'm just going to put my faith in Bitcoin. I had this motto. I think if I take care of Bitcoin, Bitcoin will take care of me. And so I started writing the articles that became the book, Why Bitcoin? And they got noticed. A few people shared them around. Eventually, Corey from Swan reached out to me and said, why don't we turn it into an ebook? And one thing led to another. And I started writing for their newly formed private division, and eventually became the editor-in-chief there. And lots of opportunities came to me when people were reading my articles. They said, Louis Liu, who's an investor who runs Mimesis Capital, came to me and said, I really like the article you wrote about this work of art that Fractal and Crypt created that he bought, which was his first mirror-based full node. He said, can you write an article called Bitcoin as Generational Wealth? I said, I didn't really know how to, but eventually the idea came to me. When I wrote it, I took it to him and I said, it really feels more like a movie than an article. Can you give me a few bucks to make a movie? And he was thrilled to do it. And I met Bitcoiners who were directors and editors. And so it came together. So like for me, the thing was, I threw myself into it without looking back, kind of burned the boats, wasn't planning on going back to the fiat world, and made the best home I could in this new frontier. And it's been good. It's been very good. It hasn't been without, we had a very long dry spell, a very long bear market. And there's been times where I've questioned, do I still have creative juices inside of myself to keep going with this thing? But, I'm here and I'm staying.
That's so cool. Well, we are very appreciative of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Last segment here, before I let you go, and new segment that I've been playing with everyone for a little bit here for the last couple of weeks, a word association game. So a new segment presented by Bitcoin trading cards. So
Cool.
that's a Sunday conversation.
I may not be very good at this.
Right. I'll tell you what, between Svetsky and Dr. Jeff and a bunch of people, we've had all kinds of different skill levels. So don't worry, Tomer. I've got like 10 or 15 words, and just whatever you think of that comes to mind, and to wrap here, throw it out there. So,
Okay.
Word association: deflation,
Fake.
fourth turning,
Not going to happen.
Satoshi Nakamoto,
Hero.
hyper Bitcoinization,
Bitcoinization.
freedom,
Bitcoin.
Hal Finney,
Hero.
Elon Musk,
Corrupted.
volunteerism,
Freedom.
writing,
Learning.
Vitalik Buterin,
Laughter. LOL.
I love it. Donald Trump,
LOL.
George Soros,
Forgotten.
Bitcoin trading cards,
Fun.
Why Bitcoin book,
Orange pill.
and Swan Bitcoin.
Good guys.
Love it. Thank you so much,
Bitcoin.
Tomer. I appreciate you coming on here and giving us an hour today. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
I'm mostly on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. So at Tomer Strolight on Twitter. My Nostr pub key is pinned to the top of my profile, so you can find me there too, but I'm a little bit less active. And my latest articles are all on the Swan blog, swan.com/blog. And my earlier writings are on Medium, so medium.com/Tomer Strolight. And you can find, if you YouTube Tomer Strolight, you'll find Bitcoin as Generational Wealth and a few other films that have been made from various of my essays.
And they're phenomenal. They're very good. So for anyone who hasn't read Tomer or seen that video, again, I'll link to a bunch of that stuff here too, but they're phenomenal. One of the best writers in the space, quite honestly. So appreciate you, Tomer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon. All the best.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the Playable Characters Show, brought to you by Bitcoin Trading Cards. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the future Bitcoin and financial experts we have on the show. Plus, we will be doing random big giveaways throughout different moments of shows, of collectible cards, sats, merch, and more from guests, so you won't miss anything. This show does not constitute any investment advice, only freedom advice. Everything you see here is opinions from the host and the guests themselves, nothing further. Please don't trust, verify. For full transparency, I do lead marketing efforts at Bitcoin Trading Cards, where we are trying to spread freedom to all of humanity and orange pill the world, one collectible physical trading card at a time, by making things fun and easy to talk about that normally make you want to cry. You can reach me directly through my email, brandon@btc-cards.com, with any inquiries or playable character suggestions. See you on the next one.